Good morning, everyone. How many of you have Mother's Day plans today? Some of you, maybe. Yes, I hope so. We had our weekend is swallowed up. Jen and I are both going different directions today, and so we celebrated Mother's Day yesterday, and we had a good time. And everybody seemed to be pretty happy with what we did, and so that's nice. You know, it's like one of those things where I did a good job this year. Yes. And it's always nice when you're responsible for something and you do it well. And this morning, I want to share with you a little bit about Mother's Day from Jesus' point of view. And so today's Mother's Day message is going to talk on some passages maybe that are a little bit different, but they are specifically about Jesus and how he honored his mom. And I think that it's going to be an encouragement to us and an example to us. But first, I want to start off with telling a story. The story was written by a lady, and she's going to share her story about her mom. And so just allow me to read this story for you. She starts by saying, "My husband Norman and I were both raised with the model of bringing elderly family into the home. My mother cared for her parents, and Norman's grandmother lived with his family for 10 years. Naturally, I figured our parents would someday move in with us. After my father died, my mother lived on her own for a decade, keeping up her house and yard and trying to stay on top of her burgeoning health problems. Her decline was a slow one, but I could see subtle changes. She would call one of us in a panic, saying she was having trouble eating, when she was really having trouble remembering directions to the grocery store. She couldn't remember which medication to take. Her vision also deteriorated, and her back problems worsened. We lived several hours away from one another at that point and kept in touch through daily phone calls and frequent visits. During one stay, my mother noticed that the home behind ours was for sale. Her decision to purchase it was a good one. She lived there for 5 years. Nearly every night, Norman would bring her over for dinner, and we regularly helped with her household chores. But as her daily care became more and more difficult, she knew it was time for a change. While we were remodeling our kitchen, my mother asked if she could come live with us. So we added to the remodel, enlarging our bedroom and bathroom to fit her needs. Since her parents had lived into their 90s, we expected the same, and we wanted her comfortable. What a blessing it was to have her with us. That's not to say there wasn't work. She needed help with everything from bathing to dressing to going to the bathroom. For some reason, instead of helping herself to food, my mother preferred that Norman or I did this for her, quickly earning her the adoring nickname, the Queen. Looking back, I know Norman and I could have gotten short with her, succumbed to anger or worried about the future, but we made an effort to laugh as much as possible, see the humor in things, and always communicate openly. I certainly wasn't raised with this kind of honest communication, but I knew it was necessary to sustain a healthy environment. I used to say, everybody do the best they can and we'll forgive the rest. Together we learned about setting boundaries, not holding grudges, and being upfront with one another. Yes, it was difficult for her to watch her health decline, and yes, it was sometimes a trying experience. My mother, for example, would often ask the same questions over and over again, but I quickly learned that getting irritated and scolding her didn't do any good. And when she complimented me on the new dress I wore every Sunday to church, I would simply respond, "I'm so glad you like it." I knew she wasn't choosing to forget. And I knew aging was part of life. So I accepted her absent-mindedness and made every effort to treat her gently, even when I didn't feel like it. This story is a common one. Stories like this are everywhere. You could read them on the internet. You can see them in our community. The scriptures teach us to love and care for everyone, to act and live in a way for the betterment of others. And there's a profound call for all Christians to be humble and selfless. This is no easy journey. It confronts the very core of our character, testing and stretching us to see how far we're willing to go to help someone. Consider this passage for a moment from Philippians 2. Therefore, if you have any encouragement from being united with Christ, if any comfort from his love, if any common sharing in the Spirit, if any tenderness and compassion, then make my joy complete by being like-minded, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of others. In fact, the language only becomes more interesting, and in some scriptures it becomes a lot stronger about honoring our parents. Allow me to read some of them for you. In Proverbs chapter 23, verse 22, it says, "Listen to your father who gave you life, and do not despise your mother when she is old." Or Proverbs 20, verse 20, "If one curses his father or his mother, his lamp will be put out in utter darkness." That's bad news, by the way. Ephesians 6, 1-3 says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may live long in the land." Or perhaps from 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 8, "But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Today, I want to focus on two texts. The first is a foundational text from Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 16, and it says this, "Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God commanded you, that your days may be long and that it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you." Point number one this morning is to honor. Now, from Deuteronomy 5, there's a lot of little details we could go into, especially in the last half of the verse, but I want to focus on the subject of what it means to honor. This commandment is an old one, but it's also a good one. Jesus carried this commandment over for us into the New Testament, and so it applies to us. It is not limited to when, for instance, if we were talking strictly about the Israelites who received this command, this command is not limited to when they were young, so that when they got older, they no longer had to honor their parents. Daniel Block, in his commentary, explains that this commandment is also not limited to when one's parents were alive. That means the Israelites needed to be mindful of how to honor their parents after they had passed from this world. For instance, one of the ways we can honor our parents after they have passed is in the way that we talk about them and speak about them. In our world today, with the online media and social platforms, anyone can say whatever they want to another individual. And there are plenty of trolls and toxic people that will make life miserable for anyone else. According to the Pew Research Center, they polled American adults from 2017 to 2020. And I'll tell you some details about that in a moment, but they define online harassment as offensive name-calling, purposeful embarrassment, stalking, physical threats, harassment over a sustained period of time, and sexual harassment. And these adults that were polled have seen an increase in all these types of harassment. The way we speak matters, whether we're in person, behind closed doors, or behind a screen. And I would want to encourage us as parents to sit down with our kids and teach them about online harassment, both as a preventative measure so they are not harassing others, but also in a way to warn them when they experience online bullying. We are called to live an honorable life and to treat others with honor. And in this particular context today, we're looking at our mothers. The word honor means to ascribe weight to. It means to treat with respect. In the same way someone would treat their master or an envoy of Yahweh or even God himself. The opposite of honor is to treat with contempt, to denigrate, to belittle, to malign, and it's often translated to curse. There is no room to disrespect one's parents in this commandment. Which leads us to Jesus and how he treated his mom in his last moments. Allow me to read John chapter 19, verse 25 to 27. And it says, near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son," and to the disciple, "Here is your mother." From that time on, this disciple took her into his home. Point number 2 this morning is final words. We looked at the idea of honor and what it means, and there's a command for us to follow that. The final words, though, are an interesting point in Jesus' life. Back in AD 70, 35-ish years after Jesus had passed away, Roman General Titus conquered Jerusalem and destroyed the temple. And when he did that, many of the Jews were crucified. A Jewish historian working for the Romans, his name was Josephus, wrote about how he saw many of his friends crucified. And as they were dying, they made pronouncements and distributed their estates from the cross. This was common practice. Loved ones came to see the last moments and hear the last words of their loved ones that were dying on the cross. Jesus' final words from the cross are profound and have been kept as treasured sources of wisdom for 2,000 years. In this story, there are a number of witnesses at Jesus' crucifixion. His mom, his aunt, Mary, the wife of Clopas, Mary from Magdala, and the beloved disciple, which is John, the guy who's writing this story. I'd like to point out a little detail about this account from R.E. Brown's book, The Death of the Messiah. In this study, he posits the idea that there's a possible link with this aunt of Jesus in our text today that was there at the cross and the mother of the sons of Zebedee from Matthew chapter 27, verse 56. What this possibly means is that if these two ladies are one and the same, Jesus was the cousin to James and John, the sons of thunder. Now, as Gary Burge points out in his commentary, this explains how the mother of James and John could expect special favors from Jesus when inquiring about who will sit on Jesus' left or on his right when the kingdom of heaven comes. And if this is true, we can see how Jesus would put his mom under the protective care of his cousin John, the beloved disciple. Family caring for family. It's at the heart of the commandment in Deuteronomy 5. Honor your mom and your dad. In this text, we see that Jesus addresses his mom as woman. Now, for our English-speaking Western-cultured ears, this might sound harsh or disrespectful. For instance, if you said that to a lady in a grocery store, you could expect your shins to be run into. But in Jesus' day, that was a formal way of addressing his mom. And what this means is that when Jesus is talking here, this is a formal declaration about what is to happen after he dies. Just as Josephus witnessed with his friends as they took care of last details in their last moments. There is no complaining, there's no eye-rolling, no fighting, no disagreements. John would care for Jesus' mom now that he is going away. Now, how many of us might consider arguing or complaining with Jesus if this was asked of us? Even within our own families, how many of us might cringe at the idea of caring for aging parents because of our lifestyle and desire not to be tied down? Perhaps you already had these conversations with your spouse, and maybe it sounded a bit like Winston Churchill's immortal words during World War II. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, and we shall fight in the hills. John nor Mary complained. Another detail about this text may be of interest to you as well. You'll notice that he's having a conversation with his family. And when he's hanging on the cross, beaten and tortured, how was he able to talk with his family? It is most likely that the Roman crosses were between 6 to 9 feet tall, depending on which historian you read, which means that Jesus was not high off the ground at all. It's a little bit different than infamous T-shapes type stuff. But Jesus wasn't that far from his family, and so his family could have been up close to talk to him. There would have been a guard there, because they needed to make sure that nobody took the prisoners down. But they were able to talk, and they were up close. What would have that been like? And as we think about Mother's Day, we can learn from the example of Jesus and how he cared for his mom. Even to his dying breath. Jesus fulfilled the law of Moses perfectly. It can be easy to think of obedience to God in terms of holy living, avoiding sin, being upright and a moral individual. But it's easy to forget that holiness is also defined in terms of how we treat our mom and our dad, how we treat our children, our cousins, and our spouses. While we are with family, we often let our hair down. We come home to rest and decompress, but in those moments we may not work hard at treating our family with respect, kind of like how we've been trying to treat people with respect all day with our coworkers and strangers, but we're absolutely tired. And it is at home with family where you will find the call to holiness as strong as anywhere else. In Gary Thomas's book, Sacred Marriage, he writes that the purpose of marriage is not first about happiness. That's not exactly a Hallmark card start, is it? No, the purpose of marriage is first about holiness. It is in the context of marriage where we find the deep and difficult challenges to love someone, to be patient at all times, to be understanding and respectful. It is with family that we can easily forget to be holy because we allow ourselves to be ourselves and live less than holy in their presence, away from prying eyes of the public, in the hopes that we can keep up appearances later on when we're outside. And so it is on Mother's Day, a day that is often celebrated with cards, flowers, and chocolate, perhaps doing the dishes or cleaning the house, where we will find an important call from God. Respect your mom. Because it's the holy thing to do. Mother's Day is more than just a token reminder to treat mom well one day of the year. It is a reminder that God himself calls us to treat our mothers with respect. And dignity, whether we're young or whether we're old, or even when our mothers have passed away onto eternity. There was a teenager who didn't want to be seen in public with her mom because her mother's arms were terribly disfigured. And one day when her mother took her shopping and reached out her hand, a clerk looked horrified. Later, crying, the girl told her mom how embarrassed she was. Understandably hurt, the mother waited an hour before going to her daughter's room to tell her for the first time what happened. Sorry, I might have a hard time getting through this story. When you were a baby, I woke up to a burning house. Your room was an inferno. Flames were everywhere. I could have gotten out the front door, but I decided I'd rather die with you than leave you to die alone. I ran through the fire and wrapped my arms around you. Then I went back through the flames, my arms on fire. And when I got outside on the lawn, the pain was agonizing, But when I looked at you, all I could do was rejoice that the flames hadn't touched you. Stunned, the girl looked at her mother through new eyes. Weeping in shame and gratitude, she kissed her mother's marred hands and her arms. As the worship team comes up right now, I want to close with this. Let us, whether we are young or old, whether our mums are still with us or have passed into eternity, remember to honor and respect our mums. This can be difficult at times, given that everyone's history and experiences are different. However, when we remember that God looks upon us with love, with sinners such as us, I am sure that at any moment we can look upon our family, upon our mums, and find something worthy to give a word of gratitude both to our moms and to God in prayer. And so let us follow Jesus' example. While Jesus was on the cross in the divine exchange, not only was our Messiah dying for our sins, he kept on loving his family, especially his mom, when he had nothing left to give. It was the loving thing to do. It was the holy thing to do.